the count of three.
Have a reason to rejoice.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Celebrate your joy.
Lift up your hand. Lift up your voice. Dance in the
Spirit. Shout to the Lord.
We are His people.
We are His people.
We've been restored.
We've been restored.
Celebrate.
Celebrate your freedom.
Come on, come on.
Celebrate your joy.
Lift up your hand.
Lift up your hands.
Lift up your voice.
Lift up your voice.
Dance in the Spirit.
Dance in the Spirit.
Oh!
Shout to the Lord.
We are His people.
We are His people.
Here we go.
We've been restored.
Good morning, kids. This morning, I want you to imagine that you are really hungry.
I am really hungry.
Imagine that you haven't had any food for 2 days. What would that be like? How would your stomach feel?
Dead.
Zay, get serious. I'm going to show you some things, and I want you to respond by all saying yes and nodding, or all saying no and shaking your head. Here we go. Now, what if I give you this? Would that help you?
No, it would not.
What about this? Would this satisfy you?
No.
What about this bread?
Yes, finally, real food.
You're right. When we are hungry in our stomachs, we need food, like this bread. Only food will satisfy that type of hunger. Today, we're going to talk about being hungry. Not just hungry for food, but also hungry for life. Let's start with the story of the Israelites in the wilderness. But first, let's start with our memory verse today.
God's story, wilderness. So part of God's story is about how God took care of his family in the wilderness. And it begins like this. For many years, God's family was stuck as slaves in Egypt. So God chose a guy named Moses to lead them out of slavery and into an amazing home called Canaan, or the Promised Land, where they could be free. From the moment the Israelites left Egypt, God made it clear that he was with his family. He led them with a cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night. He actually split the Red Sea in 2 parts so they could walk to safety. But the journey from Egypt to the Promised Land was hard. In fact, the Israelites didn't know where to find food and water, or when they would get to Canaan. So just 3 days after leaving Egypt, they started complaining. "What are we going to drink?" Now Moses knew that God hadn't freed them from Egypt and parted the Red Sea just to let them die of thirst in the desert. So he asked the Lord to help, and God helped. Then, about a month later, they complained again. "If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt," they moaned. "There, we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. Now you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us to death." They actually wished they could be slaves again. Kids, have you ever complained about something instead of trusting God for help? Well, guess what? God had a plan his family never could have imagined. In the morning, dew covered the ground, and when it was gone, there were flakes of food that looked like frost. The Israelites called it manna, which means, "What is it?" Moses told them to eat it all and not to save any. But of course, some people saved a little, just to be safe. Remember, they were worried they wouldn't have what they needed. The next morning, the old manna was full of maggots, which are little bugs. Yuck! But the good news is, there was also new manna. See, God wanted them to trust him every single day. What's really crazy, though, is on the 6th day of every week, God did tell them to gather enough for 2 days. That way, they had 1 day to rest. It's called a Sabbath, and it's a day of rest. So when they woke up on the 7th day of the week, the manna they had saved was as fresh as it was when it first fell. We don't know how that happened, but it did. Well, the Israelites kept traveling, following the cloud and fire, eating new manna every day, and getting a Sabbath every week. It might seem pretty clear that God was with them, but they weren't so sure. At one point, they even said to Moses, "Is the Lord with us or not? Why did you bring us out of Egypt? Are you trying to kill us with thirst?" The people had stopped trusting Moses, which really meant they had stopped trusting God, just because things got hard. Moses knew God had a plan, though, and he asked for help. Turns out, God had another miracle in store. God said, "Take your staff, strike the rock, and water will come gushing out." And it did. For about 40 more years, God's family wandered the desert. And all that time, God kept on giving them food, water, rest, and protection. He even kept their clothes from wearing out. God's family couldn't take care of themselves on their own. They had to trust God. But he always gave them just enough, just in time, and often in ways they could have never expected. And that's the story of how God took care of his family in the wilderness. So, in case you missed it, here's the quick version. God wanted his family to be free. God led them with a cloud and fire. He parted the Red Sea. The Israelites got thirsty and complained. God gave them water. They got hungry and complained again. God gave them food. They got thirsty and complained again. God gave them water. Again. For 40 years, God gave them what they needed. All they had to do was trust every day. And that's a part of God's story.
Didn't you say something about being hungry for life? So we're gonna be hungry for the rest of our lives?
Zane. No, it's hunger for life. A hunger for things that mean something to us, like peace and love. The hunger for real life. The life God gives us cannot be filled with things. The Bible says that only Jesus can satisfy the type of hunger. The Bible says that Jesus is the bread of life. Kids and Zane, listen and learn.
In God's true book, the Bible, Jesus uses pictures to tell us 7 great things about himself. And they all start with the words, I am. Now, I'm going to give you a clue to what our first one is. Here's a picture. Can you see it yet? Jesus said, I am the bread of life. Now, what's your favourite type of bread? White bread, brown, seeded, toasted, granary, pita, naan? My favourite bread is a freshly baked white bread. It's so good. Now, I know one type of bread that you won't like to eat. That's mouldy bread. Oh, look at that. Good bread gives us energy, doesn't it? It keeps us going. But mouldy bread takes it away. It stops us going. Our bread keeps us going, but after a bit of time, we need some more. Jesus says he is good bread. He's good bread from heaven. Now, Jesus uses this picture to say that when we believe in Jesus and we follow him, we will live forever. He is the bread that keeps us going forever. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's absolutely awesome. Where are we going to live forever? Well, don't worry. God's got that all sorted. So, to remind ourselves that Jesus is the bread of life, why don't you get a piece of paper and a pen? You can draw a grid, just like this one. Put in words like bread, Jesus, live, always. Then make sure you write it to the right-hand side, just like this. And then fill in the other squares with random letters. Now make sure that you've written all your letters down, and then give it to someone to complete. Now remember, when we believe in Jesus, we get to live with him forever.
Books of the Bible, ready, go! Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges. I want to tell you the truth about the book of Ruth. On to 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and all those things lead to Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, and Job. I want to go to heaven in a righteous robe, singing Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Solomon's song, and the prophets are these: Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Jay's lament, Ezekiel and Daniel to the lions went, Hosea, Joel, and Amos's tale, Obadiah, Jonah in the belly of the whale, Micah, Nahum, and Habakkuk's cry, Zephaniah, Haggai, then Zechariah. The last Old Testament books are real, but Malachi points to a brand new deal. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the story of Jesus, and then move on to Acts and the letters of Paul, Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, all Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and move on to 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st Timothy, 2nd Timothy, Titus, Philemon, Hebrews, and James, 2 books from Peter and John's, all 3, Jude, the Dude, and Revelation. You'll see that these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ and his grace receive.
The next 3 books sort of go together: Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. All 3 prophesied in Judah after the fall of the northern kingdom. Nahum around 650 BC, and Habakkuk and Zephaniah between 640 and 609 BC.
Just like Obadiah brought an oracle of judgment against Edom, Nahum brings an oracle of judgment against Nineveh for their sin and cruelty. A few years later, God uses Habakkuk to announce that Babylon will invade Judah, and then uses Zephaniah to talk about the day of the Lord, which means good news and blessing for those who have stayed true to God, but bad news and judgment for those who have not.
What's up, Loopsters? How's it going? I hope that you are doing well, because this week we talked about
Brains!
Philippians 4:8. Whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And typically what happens, if you're anything like me, is that you have this little thought bubble that starts popping up in your brain. You're like, well, I'm thinking it. Gotta keep thinking it. But we gotta take that little thought captive and say, you listen to me, buddy. Knock it off, okay? And let it float on. But I know you're probably thinking, Ricky, easier said than done. And I couldn't agree more. So I'm gonna use the metaphor. Okay, so we did a really cool metaphor with a Rubik's Cube. I don't have a Rubik's Cube, but I have a picture of one. Fun fact, a key to solving a Rubik's Cube is knowing where the center is, knowing what is true. So this looks like, oh no, it's so scrambled. I gotta get everything back to how it is. But the key is the center little tile never moves. See, I bet you didn't know that. So the center little tile, this side is the yellow side. Same way that this side is the blue side. The very center of each cube never changes. It is always going to stay that color. No matter how many times you move that over, the center one will always be the one that you want to get it back to. So once you know that, it's a matter of finding and sorting everything else out so that you can get to this. So this blue, white, red side, all of these sides are going to stay the same no matter what, because they all found their way home. And doing that is just like taking all the other thoughts that are all scrambly and everywhere else. It's just like, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm all these other things. It's like, okay, well, you go over here. You go over here, you go over here. I'm going to focus on what is true. But like a Rubik's Cube, it takes work to descramble all of these emotions. And especially when you are actively upset about something, it sometimes feels like you don't want to focus on what is good. You just want to focus on the things that are bad. But it's worth taking the time to descramble and focus on what is true. And there is a way to get back to the things that are worth thinking about. So let me know in the comments below, what is something that you're thinking about right now? Just right now. It could just be like, I'm thinking about you telling me to think about what I'm thinking about. But yeah, I want to know, what are you thinking about? Let us know in the comments below. And until next time, enjoy the ride!
Choose one of the following people to pray for today. People who don't have enough to eat. People who don't have a home. And people who need comfort.
Bread of heaven, Savior broken, cup of life outpoured. We are people thirst and hunger. Come renew us, Lord. Come renew us, Lord. From the mountain, blessings spoken, where we came to pray. Simple truth before us, love them in my name. Love them in...
That's all for today, kids. I hope you learned something today. Remember, we need this type of bread or food to fill our stomachs and make us healthy. We also need Jesus, who is the bread for the true, wonderful, true life that God has for us.
He's the one who makes the sun shine. He's the one who puts the moon in the sky. He's the one who hung the stars one by one. He's the one who makes the birds sing. He's the one who makes your dreams so high. He's
See